This is a Momentum Media production.
Welcome to the Smart Property Investment Show, the podcast by investors for investors.
Hello everyone, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Smart Property Investment Show. I'm Grace Ormsby, and it has been a pretty big week in the real estate sphere and the property industry. Obviously, a lot going on. The federal budget has been handed down, the second one for 2022. Bit of a hype period leading into it. I don't know necessarily how much those both within the industry and outside of it expected to be coming up for housing and property, but there is a lot to unpack, and so it's an absolute pleasure to be joined in the studio today by my teammate, Kyle Robbins. He is a journalist here at Momentum Media, working across the real estate titles. Kyle, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's good to make my debut.
Yeah, pretty exciting stuff. I mean, pretty big topic and something that you've been across pretty much even since the federal election earlier this year. Were you expecting much to come about in this budget?
Not particularly. I think what we talked about earlier in the week when we were discussing what was going to go on with the budget and our coverage and stuff, I think we were expecting more of the government to just announce that they were doubling down on, all their previously announced schemes, like the Help to Buy scheme and stuff like that. But yeah, the National Housing Accord and all the new stuff they brought in, the stuff about downsizing and stuff, was definitely a little bit of a curveball on the night. But yeah, it's probably a good budget for the industry. But yeah.
Something that you took within your stride. I mean, yeah, as I'd said, we're just sort of, and as you just mentioned, first home guarantee has been something that we've been talking about all year now. We've been talking about the expansion of, those low deposit offerings. We've seen them happen across the states as well. Everyone's probably shifted their attention more towards the stamp duty debate, which has been continuing now for a fair few years, and it's definitely a conversation that's going to continue. But the Accord is obviously a huge part of this and something that no one was really expecting. I mean, based on what we've been seeing lately, we usually get a lot of these housing promises and allocations actually ahead of the budget. So for it to be handed down kind of as a surprise thing, I think did take everyone a little bit aback.
For sure. I think what the Property Council of Australia said is that they were working in unison with the government. So I think maybe that they were getting all the stakeholders in, and that's probably why it took a little bit more time and it wasn't so much an election promise as, the Help to Buy scheme and all those other first home buyer schemes, is just that it needed a bit more work. It couldn't just be a promise that they wouldn't, they would have to scrap, No,
but it's a good point to make, We're not talking about hypotheticals anymore.
Yeah.
We didn't know who was going to win the last election. People, they were trying to buy votes, but now it's actually about, okay, how can we actually be going towards, the future? And that supply issue has been an issue for so long. So before we go any further, Kyle, can I get you to sort of give us a really brief rundown about what's actually contained within this accord? Because there's some massive figures in there.
For sure. So the government has promised 1 million homes over the next 5 years to be built. As they've said in the budget, or Jim Chalmers said in his speech, that they'll be built in reasonable areas, well-located areas. So what they define as well-located will be interesting to see, whether that'll constitute most of our regional areas or if that'll just be within, an hour of a CBD or whatever. So that's the point, that they'll be trying to build 1 million homes over the next 5 years from 2024, which is important to add. And on top of the existing commitments, the government has announced that they'll do another $350 million to help boost funding for another 10,000 new and affordable homes at energy efficient ratings. But yeah, back to the Accord, I guess the key thing is that there's stakeholders involved. It's not just the government going on a whim and going on their own. They're getting stakeholders. They're getting the states. They're getting the territories. They're sort of even trying to get a bit of some private institution involvement into it. I think they talked about super funds getting involved and trying to, at least try to get a bit more capital that's not, government based, and sort of broaden that from that perspective. But I think it's definitely an interesting thing to see if they actually hit that target, because it is quite an ambitious move.
I would say aspirational is a very good word to use there. But yeah, I mean, 1 million homes.
It's
considering
a lot.
there's 13 million or something. I'm probably pulling a number out there, but it's a massive proportion of homes. But it is an issue that we've been talking about for so long now that I guess you do need to be going that hard for it to really work.
For sure. And especially it'll be interesting to see the cost of 1 million homes, because construction prices, they're going up and they don't look like they're sort of going to slow down. Been a lot of stuff about supply chain issues, the bushfires, the flooding that's happened at the start of the
Continuing.
year and it's happening again, and another La Nina, so it might continue on until January next year. So it'll be interesting. I mean, obviously the proposal's not from until 2024 onwards, so they've got a bit of time to sort of get their stuff organized, I guess, and make sure they can actually deliver on this promise, because heading into the next election, which obviously this isn't what it's about, it's not a political thing, but if they don't deliver on that promise of 1 million new homes at a time where affordability is in both home ownership levels and rental levels is, it's a big issue. If they don't deliver on that, then could spell the end of this Labor government.
Could be interesting. We're going to take a quick break there. We'll be back to unpack a little bit more about that affordability piece just after the break. Welcome back to this very special budget edition of the podcast, where we're unpacking everything that came out of the recent federal budget. And there was a lot in there for property. Kyle, we've just been talking, we've spent, a fair while already unpacking this, but as we mentioned on the outset, no one really was necessarily expecting such a big statement on housing to be included in this. And the affordability crisis is something that we've been talking around for a long time now, both on the rental and the sales side, as you said. And this will go a long way into helping bring a lot of those rental vacancy levels probably back to more normality, which, I mean, investors may not be super, super stoked about at this point in time if they're already in the market. But at the same time, there's going to be a lot more first home buyers that are going to be able to get onto the ladder because of this. There's going to be investors who aren't being priced out of some of these areas because there'll be some more supply to actually backfill that. And I mean, given the way that migration levels could go, it's going to be needed anyway. We need to get back to some form of normality after what's been an absolutely crazy couple of years.
For sure, especially when you consider on the vacancy rate stuff that it's not even really remotely close to being at a healthy level, or what constitutes a healthy level of vacancy rates. Like, people are getting 120, 150 applications for a rental property. Like, maybe it's not good for investors, but for property managers and for agencies as well as tenants and stuff, like, it's a de-stressor to have more stock, but more stock's more purchasing opportunity as well. So like, there's a counter side to that. So yeah, look, it'll definitely be interesting. Affordability is definitely something that needs to be tackled. It's something that Hayden Groves, Real Estate Institute of Australia president, spoke about on Wednesday when his budget reaction came out. And he said something about, given Australia's housing stock, the generational injection it so badly needs, in the same way policy programs in the 1970s did, is something that's definitely needed for the country.
And it has been really, really well received from industry to date. You've been seeing some conversations around this from Property Council of Australia, Real Estate Institute of Australia. We've seen some of the states weigh in as well.
Yeah.
Is it all quite positive?
It's mostly positive. I think a lot of them are, as we touched on earlier, a lot of them are, I guess, I wouldn't say probably apprehensive or cautious, but they are noting that it's a hefty task. And so, a lot of them are saying that it is a good policy. It's good to get the states and local governments and the territory governments involved and accountable as well. The stuff about zoning policies and land release and stuff like that. So I think the Property Council of Australia and the REIA specifically did commend the government on that. But a lot of them are definitely, I guess, a bit apprehensive at saying, like, you've made these promises, but it's not just a straight path to execution. There's a lot more that needs to be done. There's so much stuff that needs to be pushed through and altered in order to get to these ambitious targets. So I think, mostly positive, but not obliviously positive in the sense that, like, oh, they're good policies, this and that. Like, it's more like, these are a step in the right direction, but execution is the key, not words.
For sure. And I will actually quote Federal Treasurer Jim Chalmers here. When he did announce the new National Housing Accord, he did note that it would be between governments, investors and industry. And the aim of it is to be building the affordable houses that the country desperately needs and to help tackle our housing crisis. So the ambition of this accord is big and it's bold, an aspiration to build 1 million new well-located homes over 5 years from 2024. So it's one of those things where, as we've said, step in the right direction. We'll see what happens. Be very interesting to see what the well-located actually means as that definition.
Yeah.
Because I think, that's great news for a lot of people if it is in the areas that it does need to be. But
for sure.
it even follows through from the conversation that we've been having for a while now around, people are moving out to well-located regional areas, and we are seeing, some of those corridors out of the capital cities be freed up. Land supply has obviously been a big thing, so I'm assuming there's going to be conversations in there with states as well as how we can actually unlock some of that area and provide that infrastructure that's so desperately needed across a lot of these places.
For sure. That you bring that up, I was actually on the phone to the Deputy Mayor of Geelong yesterday, and we sort of talked about the impacts of regional migration, and he sort of touched on the fact that Geelong, obviously it's an hour from Melbourne, so they get a lot of, especially the last 2 years, they've got a lot of people moving away from Melbourne. I think in the June quarter, they were ranked third in the country for internal migration that was of this year. And he was saying that, he wasn't like saying it in a negative tone or whatever, but he was just saying that it's tough for state and federal governments because the funding that they give is sort of blanket, but the funding that they give is only adequate for, I think he was saying it was only adequate for about a 1 to 2% net increase on migration, whereas they would double the 1 to 2%. So he's like, our infrastructure, and, there was something about heights, apartment heights and building heights, where in the CBD of Geelong, the regulations were conducive to the changes they wanted to make, but on the fringes of the CBD, those height limit policies didn't apply, so that stalled them as well. So there's still a lot of, I guess, red tape to navigate and a lot of stuff to fine print, things that need to be worked out, I guess, in order for these issues to be addressed.
Yeah, I mean, there is talk within this budget that the government will be working with local and state governments to deliver some of these planning reforms and free up land holdings, as well as expedite some of that zoning that does probably need to change. And we've seen a few little things coming out about that in the last couple of months. So it will be interesting, to see such a big budgetary push for this. We might see a huge amount of reform in the next couple of years. So very much to everyone who is listening along, watch this space. It's a pretty exciting time. And yeah, as long as everything else works out, it spells very good things for the property and real estate sectors across Australia.
For sure. And maybe that's why the government's given themselves the cushion until 2024, because maybe they realise the task at hand and the fact that there's multiple stakeholders with multiple motivations. So they've sort of not announced it and tried to rush it. Maybe that's why they've pushed it out. But look, that's for people on greater pay grades than I am.
We'll find out more in the coming weeks and months, and we'll be sure to keep you all updated as we go. We're going to take another quick break, but stick around for more chat about this federal budget and what it contains. See you on the other side of the break. Welcome back to this very special episode. We are unpacking all of the latest news from the federal budget, which did drop earlier this week. For those of you who have missed it, there's a couple of news stories up on the site. It's only 2 days ago now. It feels like it was so long ago, but 25th of October, that budget was handed down, 7:30 p.m. As we've already mentioned, massive allocations are being given to the property and housing sector, and some of them we didn't really expect, but something that probably was on everyone's radar, we've been talking about it for a little while now, is the incentivization of downsizing, and this has been looked at again. Looking forward, Carl. So what are your thoughts on, well, first of all, what's the latest on some of this downsizing incentivization, and what do you think it really means?
Yeah, so the government in the budget did announce that they would be encouraging more older Australians to downsize their homes. So they would be, the budget documents did outline that the government is extending the exemption of home sale proceeds from asset testing from 12 to 24 months. So essentially what they're doing is just trying to get more elderly Australians into more...
Be careful what you say there. Elderly, people aged 55 to 59, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the one, sorry.
They're not elderly anymore.
No, sorry to all the people in that age bracket, but people in that age bracket, they're trying to get them to right size. So move into a home that's more, I guess, more acclimatized to their living circumstances. They don't have kids running around the house anymore. They might have grandkids, but, they're not there often. They're not there as much as a child would be. So, and then the flip side of that is obviously it frees up stock for those families, those people who need to move into a 2-bedroom house in the or 2-story house in the suburbs with a nice bit of backyard that, is currently occupied. So it sort of works both ways. It's not like they're kicking these people out into the streets with no stock. There's going to be stock freed up by the people upsizing. So it's definitely an interesting one. It's definitely something that people have talked about for the last couple of months as we look at creative ways to release stock in the housing market.
Yeah, and it's something that, I mean, it was a big deal even before this allocation of 1 million extra homes in the next 5 years. So it's probably going to become, even more ideal for people now, because there probably will be homes that they're happy to be moving into. Whereas when you do have a stock supply issue and then you've got affordability going through the roof, prices going up, especially across Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, what we've seen recently, massive, massive increases from capital gains. People have been worried about, where they're going to go to next, because it hasn't been easy to necessarily buy that next purchase.
For sure. And especially another thing to consider is, and it's probably something we haven't considered much, especially over the last couple of years, is we're going to have more overseas migrants coming into the country as well, more families coming from other countries trying to live the Australian dream. So it's not just freeing up stock for people who are currently living in the country, it's freeing up stock for people that are going to be moving in 18 months time, 12 months time, 24 months time. So it's forward thinking, and it's just trying to make sure that there's a happy outcome for everyone involved, but without stepping on too many people's toes in order to achieve it.
A good point you make there. And I mean, we're an aging population.
It's the facts.
There's going to be more and more people that fall into these brackets, and to see it expanded even further. As you said, it's pretty much a great thing that's going on, and we will see, I think, just there's going to be flow-on effects a long time, further down the track than what this budget is necessarily looking at. Well, Kyle, there's been so much that's been going on with this budget, and a lot of exciting things. Obviously, we'll continue to be unpacking that. We're going to be taking a closer look later this week around, what the industry actually has to say, how well this is all going to go. Obviously, there are the questions around construction costs. That's probably going to be more of an ongoing conversation that people are having. And, I guess such a boost to supply might be what it needs to for those prices as well to start stabilizing. But beyond this, what's been going on in your world? We've obviously had a pretty busy newsroom lately. Is there anything that's really been catching your eye story-wise?
I think I don't want to sort of throw myself back into the conversation, but it is the big issue. It is sort of the rental vacancy rates. They have fallen, New South Wales at least, they've fallen to 9-year lows. I think nationally CoreLogic had them falling slightly in the September quarter, but still falling, and they had rents going the opposite direction. So I think obviously that's a big issue in the industry. I think obviously the government's trying to figure out ways to reduce that. That's been the big one. But then interestingly, on the flip side is the positive commercial vacancy rates coming out of Melbourne. I did a piece, I think maybe last week, on shopping strip vacancy rates falling to pre-COVID lows, and obviously Melbourne had it tough, probably tougher than any other city in the world. And, those small shop fronts, those, fish and chip shops and all those little small businesses would have done it tougher than any. So to sort of see that, they've got enough money to go back to a storefront, and they're going to have people there visiting every day, work from home's helping that, because people are more likely to go get their lunch from, the local shop. They're not in the office or the CBD. So I think that's probably an interesting one, is the differing views on residential vacancy rates being so low versus commercial vacancy rates being so low. But it'll be interesting to see how they go, especially residential ones, heading into next year.
It does feel like, for the most part, that COVID is pretty much, it's been and gone. It's not really on our radars as much as it has been, but I think we'll be suffering through that COVID hangover for a fair while longer. For sure,
100%, especially just the way we work as well.
So it'll be one of those very interesting things to move forward. But in saying that, while we are seeing house prices, especially across the East Coast, starting to normalise and change again, all those doomsday predictions, none of them have really come to fruition. We're obviously going to keep an eye on what the RBA does on Melbourne Cup Day, the rate that stops the nation, as we like to say here. But yeah, there's plenty going on, and obviously we'll be keeping everyone up to date every step of the way. But Kyle, thanks so much for your time today. It's been lovely to chat and just unpack some of the things that you've been working on day to day over the last couple of weeks.
Thanks for having me.
To everyone who is listening along, we hope you have enjoyed this episode. I'm about to throw Kyle under the bus and say that if you have any questions for him, don't hesitate to reach out to his email, kyle.robbins@momentummedia.com.au. As always, stay up to date with us for all the latest news on our website. Subscribe to our newsletter if you have not already. Stay up to date with us on our social media too, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And as always, like or review us on whatever platform that you do listen to your podcasts on. Until next time, stay safe and well wherever you're listening from. Bye-bye.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.
Have you signed up to HR Leader? Go to hrleader.com.au to subscribe. Receive the latest HR and people leadership insights and news.